I never imagined I'd be the kind of mother who would rewrite her will out of spite. But then again, I never imagined my children would be the kind who could let me lie alone in a hospital bed for 2 weeks without even sending flowers. The steady beep of the monitor beside me marked the passing time, a rhythmic reminder of my solitude. Outside, spring had arrived in Oakridge, coloring the world with shades of renewal. But from my window on the 3rd floor of Memorial Hospital, all I could see were the shadows of what my life had become. Before we dive back in, let us know where you're tuning in from. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button because tomorrow, I've got something even more special lined up just for you. Mrs. Wilson, your vitals are looking good today. Nurse Kim's voice was warm as she adjusted my four. Any visitors coming? She asked, her eyes softening. The question was almost too familiar. I smiled politely, lying without effort. Yes, my son Michael mentioned he might stop by after work. The kindness in her gaze betrayed that she knew better. For the last 16 days, the only visitors had been medical staff. The chair beside my bed, once intended for family, remained empty, a silent reminder of my loneliness. As she left, I reached for my phone. Another day, another attempt. The phone rang with hollow echoes before my eldest son's voicemail greeted me. You've reached Michael Wilson, CEO of Wilson Development. I'm unavailable at the moment, his recorded voice droned, followed by the sound of a beep. I hung up without leaving a message. What more was there to say? I'd sent him dozens of messages already. 68 years of my life had been spent believing that family meant showing up, being present, and sacrificing for one another. I had built my entire existence around that belief. My name is Eleanor Wilson, Ellie to the few who knew me before I became a mother, a Mrs., and a grandmother. I had taught high school English for 37 years in Oakridge, a town that had been home to generations of families rooted in the soil of towering Douglas firs. I often ran into my former students in the grocery store. Their smiles were genuine, warming something in me. Mrs. Wilson, you were my favorite teacher, they'd say, and for a brief moment, I would remember why I chose teaching as a career. But the affection and nostalgia for my work only underscored my deepening disappointment in the children I had raised. Michael, my oldest, had built a successful real estate empire. Becky, my middle child, was a marketing executive in Seattle, and Daniel, my youngest, had made his fortune in tech before opting for a life of sailing. They were everything any parent could hope for: smart, driven, and successful. Or so I had thought. Mom, we're just so busy right now, their mantra. Phone calls had grown shorter, and visits more infrequent. The holidays became negotiations about whose turn it was to host me, as if I were a burden to be passed around. Last Christmas, I sat at Michael's gleaming dining table, watching my grandchildren. Ashley, 16, Tyler, 14, and Emma, 12, absorbed in their phones while Jennifer, Michael's wife, served a catered dinner. The conversation drifted toward their upcoming vacation in the Maldives. You should come visit sometime, Mom, Michael had said, not looking up from his roast. When things slow down. I had smiled and replied, knowing full well that it would never happen. The same pattern played out with Becky and her husband Thomas. Their invitations always came with meticulously timed brunches, where Becky would check her watch every few minutes. Daniel, ever the traveler, sent expensive gifts with cards signed by his assistant. I never complained. I smiled, I nodded, and I told them I understood. After all, isn't that what mothers do? We understand. We forgive. We make excuses. When my birthday arrived in February, I received a floral arrangement from Michael and Jennifer, no doubt chosen by Jennifer. Becky sent a text at 9:47 p.m. Daniel forgot altogether. I spent the day alone in my garden, sipping wine and reflecting on how I had once held these same children in my arms as they took their first breaths, their first steps, spoke their first words. I had been there for countless recitals, games, and award ceremonies. I had helped pay for their education, their first cars, and their weddings. That evening I found myself digging through old photo albums. Michael, grinning proudly with his science fair trophy. Becky, in her ballet costume, legs long and determined, Daniel, covered in mud after winning his first soccer championship. Where did we go wrong? I whispered to James's photograph on the mantel. His eyes, so similar to Daniel's, seemed to hold no answers. The next morning, I felt a strange tightness in my chest while tending to my roses. I dismissed it as heartburn and took an antacid, but as the day wore on, the pain intensified, radiating down my left arm. Even then, I hesitated to call my children. Instead, I dialed 911 myself, locked the door behind me, and walked to the ambulance under my own power. A neighbor I barely knew watched from her porch with more concern than my own children. At the hospital, things moved quickly. Mild heart attack, Dr. Peters explained, his voice gentle but serious. We've caught it early, but you'll need to stay for observation and possibly a stent procedure. My children. I started, then hesitated. I should call them. He handed me my phone before stepping out to give me privacy. I called Michael first. Mom, I'm in a meeting, he said, his voice clipped. I'm in the hospital, I said simply. I've had a heart attack. The silence that followed lasted 3 beats too long. Are you okay? He finally asked. They're keeping me for observation. They mentioned a possible procedure. Okay, well keep me posted, he said. I've got investors here right now, but I'll try to swing by later if I can wrap this up. He hung up before I could respond. Becky didn't answer at all, so I left a voicemail. Daniel texted back an hour later. That sounds scary. Let me know if you need anything. I'm in Cabo right now, but sending good vibes. Good vibes. My son was sending good vibes instead of his presence. I set my phone down and stared at the ceiling, counting the tiny holes in the acoustic tiles until the pain medication took effect and I drifted into uneasy sleep. The next morning, Dr. Peters confirmed that I would need a stent procedure. Is there someone we should contact to be here with you? He asked. I thought about lying to preserve the fiction of a devoted family, but something in me had shifted. No, I replied. There's no one. His eyes held mine for a moment longer than necessary, and I wondered if he saw the shame there, the failure of a mother whose children couldn't be bothered to show up when she needed them most. The procedure went well, and Dr. Peters assured me afterward, "Your heart is stronger than you think, Mrs. Wilson." If only he knew how wrong he was. My heart was breaking in ways no stent could repair. Days passed. I watched other patients receive visitors, spouses holding hands, children bringing homemade food, grandchildren drawing pictures. The flowers on their windowsills multiplied, while mine remained bare except for the arrangement from the hospital volunteer group. I made excuses for my children to the nurses. They live out of state, I lied. In truth, Michael lived just 20 minutes away, and Becky was only an hour away. Only Daniel had a legitimate excuse. On the 5th day, Becky finally called. Mom, I'm so sorry I haven't made it there yet. This product launch is just consuming every minute. How are you feeling? Better, I said. And it wasn't entirely untrue. Physically, I was improving. Emotionally, something inside me was hardening, crystallizing into a clarity I hadn't possessed before. That's great, she said. Listen, I was thinking maybe we could move your follow-up care to a facility closer to Michael's. It would be easier for everyone to visit. Translation: it would be more convenient for them to pop in for obligatory 15-minute visits between more important engagements. I'll think about it, I replied. Later that day, Dr. Peters came by during his rounds. He sat on the edge of my bed, something doctors rarely do, and asked about my garden. Somehow, we'd begun talking about it during one of his earlier visits. The irises should be blooming now, I told him. Purple and yellow ones near the stone bench. He smiled. I have a confession to make, Mrs. Wilson. I live in your neighborhood. I've admired your garden many times on my morning runs. Really? Which house is yours? I asked, surprised. The Blue Craftsman on Cedar Street, just around the corner from you. With the magnificent rhododendrons, he said, looking pleased. My wife's pride and joy. We talked for nearly an hour about gardens, books, and the town's history. It was the longest conversation I'd had with anyone in weeks. Before leaving, he hesitated. Mrs. Wilson. Ellie, if I may, you should know that your recovery is going well. But healing isn't just physical. He met my gaze steadily. What do you mean? I asked. I mean that sometimes the greatest injuries aren't the ones we can treat with medicine, he said, gesturing to the empty visitor chair. I've seen it before, patients who heal more slowly because they're carrying other burdens. My eyes burned with sudden tears. They're busy, I said weakly. Important careers, families of their own. Dr. Peters nodded. Of course. I understand. Busy. I work 80-hour weeks, but when my mother had her hip replaced last year, I took a week off because that's what family does. After he left, I lay awake thinking about that word. Family. What did it mean anymore? Was it just shared DNA, or was it something earned through presence? Through showing up? The days blurred together. I was still in the hospital, still processing the disorienting reality of my children's absence. Michael had sent a brief text, telling me he was thinking of me, and that we needed to talk soon. Becky hadn't even bothered to reply to my voicemail, and Daniel had been absent for too long. The room was quiet, save for the soft beeping of the heart monitor that had become my constant companion. I hadn't told them that the doctors had said I could go home in a few days, or that my recovery was steady. I hadn't told them that for once, I felt capable of standing on my own. Maybe, just maybe, this was the push I needed to reclaim control of my life. The evening passed, and when the nurse came to check my vitals, I couldn't help but feel the weight of my isolation. She smiled gently as she adjusted the 4-drip. You're doing well, Mrs. Wilson. Any visitors expected today? I hesitated before answering, my gaze shifting toward the window, watching as the last bits of daylight faded behind the hospital's glass. Not really, I said, offering a polite but nonchalant smile. I'm sure they'll find time soon. She gave me a knowing look. Your children? I nodded, though there was a bitter edge to my answer. Yes. They've got their hands full. Her expression softened. It's never easy, is it? Life's full of surprises, I replied, my voice quieter now, almost reflecting the dull throb in my chest. It wasn't just physical pain I was trying to recover from. It was a deeper wound, one that I hadn't been able to put words to before now. The next day, I was discharged. The doctor gave me a stern reminder to take it easy and return for follow-up appointments. I nodded absently, but my mind was already elsewhere. I wanted to go home, back to my garden, back to the sanctuary I had tended to for so long. But I also knew something had changed. The world I had so carefully crafted around me, full of family and familiar routines, was no longer the same. Something had fractured, and I wasn't sure I could glue it back together. When I arrived home, the familiar scent of jasmine in the garden greeted me like an old friend. The house felt still, almost too quiet. I took a deep breath as I entered, the worn wooden floors creaking underfoot. The house, once filled with the laughter of children and the bustle of life, now seemed hollow. I decided to take a walk in the garden, something to center myself, to remind myself that at least this one thing in my life was still under my control. I paused at the fence, admiring the delphiniums James had planted years ago. Their blue blooms seemed to reach toward the sky, defying the odds. They were resilient, just like I needed to be. The front door opened behind me, and I turned to see Ashley, Michael's daughter, standing in the doorway. Her face was framed by the bright sunlight as she stepped out onto the porch. "Grandma," she called softly, her voice carrying across the quiet yard. I smiled warmly. "Ashley, you've come." She nodded and took a few steps toward me, her eyes flicking nervously to the garden before meeting mine. "Are those the delphiniums Grandpa planted?" she asked, her gaze soft with curiosity. "They are. Your grandfather had an eye for beauty, always making sure there was something growing." He loved seeing the flowers bloom each year. She gazed at the flowers for a moment longer, then lowered her phone, clearly trying to figure out the right words. "Grandma," she began, her voice hesitant. "Dad said you're being difficult about moving into a retirement home." I stiffened. So Michael had started his campaign to help me. The directness in Ashley's voice was a welcome contrast to her father's manipulative style. "What do you think?" I asked her. "Should I leave my home just because your father thinks it's best?" Ashley looked thoughtful. "I don't know," she admitted. "It's your life, isn't it? You should be able to decide where you live." I nodded in agreement. "Exactly," I said, feeling a spark of relief. Ashley, at least, still saw me as a person, not a problem to be managed. "Does this look like a home of someone who can't think clearly?" I gestured to the house behind me, the garden meticulously maintained, the fresh coat of paint on the trim, the clean windows. "No," Ashley said, her voice quiet. "It looks nice. Better than our house, actually. Mom's too busy for gardening." I smiled faintly, my heart aching slightly for the child who seemed to understand me better than her parents did. "I thought it was strange that no one visited you in the hospital," she added, her voice small. The words stung, but they didn't surprise me. "I would have loved to see you," I said softly. "Your mother told you I was too sick for visitors, didn't she?" Ashley's face fell. "Yes, she did. But I didn't think that was true. I tried to tell Dad we should come, but he said it was too depressing." I reached for her hand, touched by her honesty. "You're brave to say that, Ashley," I told her sincerely. "It means a lot to me." She hesitated, then looked up at me. "Grandma, I don't think they're being fair to you. And I don't think they're telling the truth about the hospital either." I squeezed her hand gently. "No, they're not. But let's keep this between us for now. I don't want you getting in trouble with your parents." Ashley nodded, her face serious. "I won't tell anyone." After she left with Jennifer, I sat down in the garden for a long time, lost in thought. Ashley's visit had confirmed my suspicions about Michael's motivations. He wasn't just after my property out of greed, he needed it. The real estate market was volatile, and his business was struggling. But it was also a reminder of what I stood to lose by severing ties with my family. Not just the material things, but the people who still cared, like Ashley, who had shown up in my moment of need. That evening, Robert called with an update. "Good news, Ellie," he said. "Dr. Feldman's assessment was unequivocal. You scored in the top percentile for cognitive function in your age group. If Michael tries to claim diminished capacity, we've got solid evidence to the contrary." I breathed a sigh of relief. "That's good news," I agreed, though the victory felt hollow. "But Robert, I've been thinking. Is there a way to protect my assets and my autonomy without completely disinheriting my children?" He paused before responding. "There are options," he said carefully. "We could set up a trust with specific conditions. You can ensure your house and other major assets remain under your control during your lifetime, with distributions only after your passing, and perhaps with certain stipulations." "What kind of stipulations?" I asked. "Some people require regular family visits or involvement during their lifetime," he suggested. "Others specify that beneficiaries must achieve certain milestones: education, community service, sustained employment. Some even include ethical conduct clauses." I mulled it over. Could I require them to make weekly hospital visits if I'm ever admitted again? Robert chuckled softly. "That's unusually specific, but yes, it could be arranged. The challenge would be verification." "I'm not ready to give up on them entirely," I admitted, my voice tinged with sorrow. "Especially Ashley. She's different from her parents." Robert was silent for a moment, considering. "We'll find a middle path," he said. "Protection for you now. Possibility for them later." I hung up feeling a sense of control returning. My children had underestimated me, thinking that age and illness had dulled my senses. They were about to discover their mistake. The next morning, I woke up with a renewed sense of determination. The past few days had been filled with confusion and emotional turmoil, but now, the pieces were beginning to fall into place. I needed to protect myself, not just physically, but emotionally and financially. I was done making excuses for people who had chosen their convenience over their family. I spent the morning gathering my thoughts, preparing for the meeting with Patricia Winters, the elder law attorney I had called the previous day. Robert had assured me she was the best at what she did, and I needed her expertise to set up the right protections for my estate and my independence. The meeting with Patricia was informative. She was direct, no nonsense, and yet she had a quiet warmth that put me at ease. We sat in James' study, a room that had once been filled with his presence. I could almost feel him beside me as I began outlining my wishes for the future. "Ellie, I understand you want to make sure your children are provided for without giving them complete control over your estate," Patricia said, her voice steady as she reviewed the documents I had brought with me. "You want to ensure that they are held accountable for their actions, especially when it comes to Michael." I nodded, a tightness in my chest as I thought of my eldest son. Michael had always been so driven, but lately, I could feel the desperation in his actions. This was no longer about family. This was about him securing his own financial survival at any cost. Patricia continued, "We can set up a trust with provisions that will allow you to keep control over your assets during your lifetime. But once you pass, we can set conditions for the inheritance. Perhaps based on certain behaviors, achievements, or involvement in the family. We could even require that they visit you regularly, something to ensure that they remain part of your life in a meaningful way, not just as people who want what you have." I considered this. What about something specific for Ashley? She's the only one who seems to truly care. Patricia raised an eyebrow, her interest piqued. "We can create a separate trust for Ashley, one that's free from Michael and Jennifer's control. That would ensure she gets what she needs when she reaches adulthood, without them being able to interfere." "That sounds like a good idea," I said, relieved to have a plan in place for Ashley, the granddaughter who had shown the most genuine concern for me during this whole ordeal. "And as for your house," Patricia added, flipping through the documents, "you could donate it to a community land trust or set it up for affordable housing. This would ensure that Michael couldn't take it and turn it into condos like he wants. You've worked hard to maintain this home. It's important to you." I smiled at the thought of my home being used for a good cause. "Yes, I'd like that. I want my home to live on as a place of purpose, not just as a valuable piece of property." Patricia nodded approvingly. "We can make that happen." As we finished up the meeting, I felt a sense of relief settle over me. I had a plan now, one that would allow me to maintain my dignity, protect my assets, and ensure that the people who truly cared for me were taken care of. It wasn't about punishment, but about safeguarding the future while holding my children accountable for their actions. The following day, I went to the hospital for my follow-up appointment with Dr. Keller, my cardiologist. The meeting was routine, and everything seemed to be healing well. But as I left the office, my phone buzzed with a text from Raymond. "Security system is set up. I'll swing by this afternoon to make sure everything's working." I felt a small sense of peace at his message. With the security cameras in place and the trust and will provisions being finalized, I was starting to feel like I was regaining control over my life. When I returned home that afternoon, Raymond was waiting for me. The security system was up and running, discrete cameras positioned at all the right angles, and everything was accessible from my phone. It felt surreal, needing this kind of protection from my own family, but it was also empowering. I wasn't the helpless woman they seemed to think I was. Raymond and I sat in the garden afterward, watching the sun sink lower in the sky. He asked how I was holding up, and I shared my mixed feelings, relief, anger, and sadness all tangled together. "I'm sad about how things have turned out," I confessed. "Sad about my children. But," I added, "I'm also starting to see things more clearly. I've spent too long trying to make excuses for them, for their behavior. I can't do that anymore." Raymond gave me a soft, understanding look. "That's strength, Ellie. not weakness. It takes strength to put boundaries in place and stick to them, even when it hurts. His words hit home in a way I hadn't expected. I had spent so many years bending over backward for my children, trying to keep the peace, trying to keep the family intact. But what had it gotten me? Disrespect. Manipulation. I couldn't continue that cycle. That evening, after Raymond had left, I received a call from Daniel. His voice was lighter than it had been in the past. "Mom, I've been thinking about everything. I know I've been distant, and I'm sorry. I want to be here for you. For real. Not just when there's a crisis." I felt a pang of hope stir in my chest. For the first time in years, Daniel was taking responsibility for his actions. We agreed to meet the next day for lunch, to talk things through. Maybe there was a way forward for us, a way to rebuild trust after so much time had passed. As I hung up the phone, I realized that this was a turning point. I wasn't the woman who had accepted the crumbs of her children's attention anymore. I was standing up for myself, reclaiming my dignity. It wasn't just about the money or the property anymore. It was about respect. It was about showing my children, and myself, that I mattered. The next day, Daniel and I met at a small cafe in town. He was different. More open, more present. We talked about everything and nothing. His work, his travels, his recent efforts to reconnect with his own roots. We even talked about my garden and how much he had once loved helping me plant the flowers when he was younger. I saw the man he had become, not just the boy I had raised. And in that moment, something shifted between us. There was still pain, still hurt from the past, but there was also the potential for healing. Perhaps the distance could be bridged. As we finished our lunch, Daniel looked at me with sincerity in his eyes. "I want to make things right, Mom. For both of us." And for the first time in a long time, I believed him. That evening, as I sat in my garden, the soft hum of the neighborhood around me, I realized that I had made it through. I had faced the harsh truths about my family, about my children's behavior, and about myself. And now I was reclaiming my life, not just as a mother, but as a woman who had the right to live on her terms. I had always loved my garden for its resilience. It was proof that things could grow again, no matter how much they had been pruned or neglected. Just like me. The days that followed felt strangely lighter, as though a weight I hadn't fully realized I was carrying had been lifted. My meetings with Robert, Patricia, and Raymond had given me a renewed sense of control over my life and future. The decisions I had made regarding my estate, my will, and my trust were no longer just about protecting my assets. They were about protecting my dignity and ensuring that my wishes would be honored, regardless of the manipulation or neglect I had faced from my own children. It was a Friday afternoon when the final documents for the trust and will were ready. I signed them with a sense of finality, knowing that the decisions I was making would have long-lasting impacts. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel anxious or uncertain. I felt strong. That evening, as I sat on my back porch, watching the golden hour light filter through the trees, I received a text from Daniel. "Just wanted to check in. How are you holding up after everything?" His message was simple, but there was sincerity in it that I hadn't felt from him in years. I sat with the phone in my hand, a slight smile tugging at my lips. In his own way, Daniel was trying. And for that, I was grateful. I replied, "Better than I have in a long time. Thank you for being there." He responded almost immediately, "I mean it, Mom. I want to be part of your life. For real this time." The promise in his words settled somewhere deep inside me, like the gentle warmth of the sun sinking lower in the sky. Maybe we could rebuild something, after all. It wouldn't be easy, but I was willing to try. The next morning, as the sun filtered through the curtains, I received a call from Raymond. I'd come to appreciate his calm demeanor and his unwavering support through all of this. He'd been a reliable friend, someone who understood what I was going through without judgment. "I've been thinking about you," Raymond said, his voice warm over the phone. "I know this has been a lot to process, and I just wanted to check in." "I'm doing okay," I said, meaning it. "I'm getting used to the idea of standing up for myself, of not just letting things slide anymore. It's a strange feeling, but a good one. Raymond's laugh was soft. You've come a long way, Ellie. I admire your strength. I couldn't help but appreciate his words. Strength. I hadn't really considered it until recently, but in a way, that was exactly what I had discovered about myself. I had spent so many years being the accommodating mother, putting everyone else's needs first. But now, I was putting myself first, for the first time in my life. And it felt right. I think I owe you an apology, Raymond said, his voice sincere. For not reaching out sooner, for not offering more support. No need for apologies, I said with a smile. You've been a friend when I needed one, and that's enough. We talked for a while longer, and then he said something that made me pause. I'm not just asking as a friend, but as someone who cares about you. How about we take this slow? No pressure, just getting to know each other outside of everything that's happened. I think you deserve that. I could feel my heart flutter in my chest. Slowly, I nodded to myself, though I knew he couldn't see me. Maybe it was time to consider more than just family ties. I'd spent so much of my life focusing on my children, on taking care of them, and then letting the world and my relationships pass me by. Maybe now was the time to look forward to something new. I think I'd like that, I said, my voice soft but certain. Let's see where it goes. The days turned into weeks, and slowly but surely, I began to rebuild the life I'd almost lost to resentment and bitterness. Daniel came by regularly, and we spent time together, not just talking about the past, but about the future. He shared his dreams of returning to Oakridge Harbor for good, of putting down roots, and even talked about his desire to start a family one day. Maybe you should start with lunch first, I teased one afternoon, grateful for the lightness that seemed to fill our conversations now. Fair point, Daniel said with a laugh. But, honestly, I'm thinking about staying for the long haul. I want to be here for you, Mom. And I believed him. For the first time, I didn't feel like he was speaking out of obligation or guilt, but out of a genuine desire to be part of my life again. The distance between us was closing, not just because of a family crisis, but because we were both choosing to make the effort. As time passed, I began to notice the subtle changes in my relationships. The awkward silences with Daniel were replaced by comfortable moments, quiet talks on the porch, and the shared appreciation of our gardens. His once a place of rebellion, now a sanctuary of sorts. He began to come over to help with the maintenance of my flower beds, teaching me new tricks for how to care for the plants we had once planted together. Our shared love for the earth, for growing things, became a bridge between us. At the same time, I maintained my distance from Michael and Becky. Their attempts to re-enter my life, under the guise of concern, continued, though less frequently. Each time, I politely declined, redirecting them to my attorney. The distance between us had grown, and I wasn't willing to let them back in without a fundamental change in their behavior. But the hardest decision I had to make was about the legacy of my estate. I had thought long and hard about what to do with my house. And in the end, I chose to place it in a community land trust. My home would remain a space for others to enjoy, maintained as an affordable housing project for teachers, caregivers, and community workers. It would not be sold for condos, as Michael had hoped. It was the perfect way to honor James and the life we had built here. The land would continue to serve a purpose, even long after I was gone. I was content with that choice, and for the first time in years, I felt truly at peace with the legacy I would leave behind. Then, one evening as the sun was setting, Daniel and I took a walk through the garden, talking about our plans for the future. The air was cool, the scent of jasmine and roses drifting in the breeze. You know, Daniel said thoughtfully, I've been thinking about what you said about family, and I think you're right. It's not just about blood, it's about respect and trust. I want to be part of this family. I want to show you that I can be dependable, just like the people who have been here for you, like Raymond. I stopped walking, surprised at how much his words meant to me. It wasn't just about him trying to rebuild our relationship. It was about him understanding the importance of loyalty, respect, and accountability. I know you can, Daniel, I said, my voice thick with emotion. And I'm proud of you, for the man you've become. As the seasons changed, so did the dynamics of our family. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. I still missed James every day, but I could feel him in the breeze, in the way the garden bloomed each year, and in the quiet moments I shared with Daniel. And so, life went on. With every season, there was new growth, new hope, and new beginnings. As the weeks passed, my life began to find its balance again. There were still moments of uncertainty, especially when Michael and Becky occasionally resurfaced, each time attempting to reassert themselves into my life. Their calls and messages, filled with feigned concern and polite inquiries, were now nothing more than noise. I had learned to ignore them, focusing instead on the relationships that truly mattered. Daniel, with his newfound commitment, had become a regular part of my life. We shared moments in the garden, discussing everything from the future of Oakridge Harbor to his plans for returning to live nearby. His visits were no longer just to check on me, they were an opportunity to connect, to make up for lost time. The days were often quiet, but they held a contentment I hadn't felt in years. There was something deeply fulfilling in the stillness, in tending to my flowers, preparing meals in the kitchen, and enjoying long phone calls with friends who had proven themselves more than willing to support me. I had learned that real family wasn't always blood. It was those who showed up, consistently, with no hidden agenda. One afternoon, while trimming the lavender bushes near the back fence, Raymond stopped by. I had grown accustomed to his regular visits, and I had to admit I looked forward to them. His visits were always simple, sometimes just to check on my recovery or to chat about the neighborhood. Today, though, he seemed different, more thoughtful than usual. "I've been meaning to talk to you about something," Raymond said as we stood near the garden gate, admiring the new buds on the climbing rose. I wiped my hands on my gardening gloves and turned to face him. "What's on your mind?" He hesitated, as if weighing his words. "I think it's time to acknowledge that you've been through a lot, and that I've been here, not just as your doctor, but as someone who truly cares about your well-being." My heart gave a little leap, though I wasn't entirely sure why. Maybe it was the quiet sincerity in his voice or the way he looked at me as though he saw me. Not just the patient, not just the woman who had been in the hospital, but the person I was. "You've been a rock for me," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "I'm grateful for everything you've done." Raymond smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "I'm happy to do it, Ellie. But I'm also hoping you might let me be there in a different way. For both of us." There was a pause, and I realized what he was saying. I swallowed, unsure of how to respond. The idea of more than just friendship had been floating around in my mind for weeks, but hearing it from him felt like a revelation. Maybe it was the first time in a long while I'd allowed myself to think about opening up to something new. "What are you asking?" I asked, my voice quiet but not apprehensive. "I'm asking if you'd like to explore more, if you'd like to see where this could go, Ellie. Not out of obligation, but because I believe there's something real between us." I studied his face, searching for any hint of doubt or second thoughts. But there was only honesty, and something else, something I hadn't realized I needed until now. The possibility of someone truly understanding me, someone who wasn't part of the mess I'd come from, someone who respected me for exactly who I was. "I'd like that," I said, the words surprising even me. "I think I'd like that very much." It wasn't a grand gesture, not a sweeping romantic moment, but rather a quiet acknowledgement that we had both been searching for something more. Over the following weeks, Raymond and I took things slowly. We spent more time together, walking through the garden, sharing meals, discussing everything from the mundane to the deeply personal. It was comfortable, easy, and more than I had expected. Daniel, too, continued to be a part of my life in a way that felt more genuine. He had truly embraced his role as a son, someone who showed up, who took the time to listen and learn about my life beyond the legal disputes and past hurts. He and Raymond struck up a surprising friendship, often meeting over coffee to discuss the town's future and the challenges of balancing professional ambition with personal fulfillment. I could sense the shift in my relationship with Daniel, too. He no longer viewed me as a caretaker for his emotional needs or a sounding board for his frustrations. We were becoming equals, and though it was still a work in progress, I could see the promise of a deeper bond. One evening, as we sat together on the back porch, Daniel asked, "Are you happy, Mom?" The question took me by surprise, but as I looked out at the sprawling garden, the sun beginning its descent behind the trees, I realized it was a question I hadn't asked myself in years. "I think I am," I said, my voice steady but full of emotion. "I'm content. For the first time in a long time, I'm truly content." He smiled, his eyes softening. "That's all I ever wanted for you." The community I had built around me, Raymond, Daniel, my neighbors, and my friends, had become my new family. It wasn't the family I had once envisioned, but it was better in many ways. It was real. It was rooted in respect and understanding, not obligation or selfish need. As the seasons continued to change, I focused on the things that mattered most to me. I hosted garden parties for my neighbors, where we laughed and shared stories, and I spent quiet evenings with Raymond, discussing our hopes and dreams for the future. The house I had once feared losing had become more than just a building. It had become a home filled with warmth, community, and a sense of belonging. Though Michael and Becky remained distant, their attempts to manipulate me grew more transparent. I didn't engage with them, nor did I feel the need to. I had reclaimed my life, my autonomy, and my peace of mind. For the first time in years, I had found balance. One afternoon, as I tended to the roses in the garden, Daniel came by with a small package in his hand. "For you," he said, holding it out to me with a grin. I took it curiously, unwrapping the paper to reveal a beautiful hand-painted pot, decorated with colorful blooms and vines. It was simple but thoughtful, a reflection of the time he had spent learning what I loved. "Do you think it will survive in the garden?" he asked, his eyes hopeful. "Absolutely," I said, smiling. "I'll make sure it gets the perfect spot." As I placed the new pot among the other flowers, I felt a sense of completion. Life had come full circle. What had once been broken, my family, my sense of self, was slowly mending. I had learned that growth didn't come without pain, but it was possible. My garden, my relationships, and my life were all living proof of that.